This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Does anything give you the impression that Phil's in a hurry?
You're in a hurry, Phil?
I'm going to speak really
deliberately slowly.
I wouldn't be so childish.
No. So you would.
Hello and welcome. That sounded a little bit common, sorry.
What?
Hello and welcome to the Confessions podcast from the BBC.
Better.
It's got an H in front of it.
Yes,
Don't
it
just
does.
say hello. I don't think that's acceptable.
Correct.
Anyway, with some certain standards. Anyway, so a whole bunch of sinning stories coming up. Sister Bobby and Brother Matt just sitting, waiting, with great enjoyment and love in their hearts, waiting to relive some fine memories.
Not quite so much love, but
No,
yes.
I don't think so. Well, you just been speaking to Graham Souness.
Yeah.
What do you think he'd be like if he were part of this? No,
On the
absolutely.
collective. No.
This week's collection includes Louise's confession, Fake by the Ocean, Floyd's misdemeanor, Needles and Sins, Pie's Sorry Story, Return to Sender, plus another tale we've unearthed from the confession script, which you're going to love. But first, we start with Father F's confession. This is Tongue Tied.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Father Simon, Brother Matt and Sister Bobby. My first confession, which does not need confession, is that I am a priest, a bona fide, genuine, Church of England, forgiveness-bestowing priest. What follows is a tale which I've already cleared with the real God, but
Good to know.
I feel still needs your consideration.
Okay.
Okay. In other words, he's got a showbiz story, so he wants to tell us about it. As a new chaplain in post, I was conducting my first Holy Communion service with a small but devout group of faithful churchgoers. This always entails an element of concern, mainly to make a good impression whilst being faithful to the gospel. Having been ordained for several decades, my experience prepared me for most eventualities. However, this is where the story gets technical. There are a number of ways during communion to deliver the wafer to the recipient. In the low church, this involves the simple placing of the wafer in an outstretched hand. In the high church, this can involve the more delicate placing of the wafer on the outstretched tongue. In a chaplaincy setting, there can be an interesting mix of the two. After the appropriate prayers and blessings had been prayed, I walked to the rail where the faithful were kneeling. As a low church man, where we don't do ritual, but conscious of the delicacy of the high church operation where they do, I said a quiet prayer that it would all go well. This prayer was not particularly answered. I approached the husband of my new church warden, waiting for the hands to reach out to receive the wafer, even.
And the waiter.
Beg your pardon, to receive the wafer. Sadly, I waited in vain and instead saw his tongue reach out to receive the consecrated wafer. This was delivered delicately and decorously with no drama. A precedent had been set, so I moved to his wife, my new church warden, a key official in the efficient running of the church. I was ready. I had successfully negotiated my first tongue and moved forward with, which is a good line, Father.
Yes, it is.
I moved forward with confidence, wafer at the ready. My fingers moved towards her tongue for the delicate operation of placing the wafer without my finger and her tongue making contact. The operation was proceeding smoothly until finger and tongue withdrew, the transition having been seemingly completed. However, this was not actually the case. The wafer wobbled and then dropped. And let's just say that it disappeared into a delicate gap and could not have landed more perfectly in her décolletage. It's surely not going to go in the cleavage.
No.
This was not a scenario that theological college had prepared me for. Thankfully, my church warden saw the funny side and started heaving with laughter. Unfortunately, this had some consequent effects, involving a much shaken wafer, which had now, frankly, disappeared to who knows where. And it's not my priestly concern to consider these matters.
No.
My thoughts varied from, I must rescue the wafer, to, no, I don't think that would look good.
No, it wouldn't.
And then to controlling my own heaving bosom. With, if I may say so myself, remarkable decorum, I placed another wafer and moved on, maintaining what little dignity was left in such circumstances. I do not ask forgiveness from my church warden, as her heaving shoulders seemed to indicate that she was enjoying the scenario. As a priest, I am confident that I have also received divine forgiveness. But I do seek forgiveness from you for the unhealthy delight with which I have told this story many, many times, which is why Father wants to come before us for a little bit of showbiz confession with some stardust. Sister Bobby.
Well, there's a lesson for us, isn't there? Cover up.
Well, there is. Well, the lesson is zip up, basically.
Yeah, be careful of crumbs and things like that.
Have a high neckline.
That's
You
my
need
lesson.
listen. If you need a polar neck, you need a turtleneck.
That's good. Hand them out.
That's what I'm saying. Is that's the advice. What I love about this story, of course, look, you're forgiven. There's nothing else you could do. What I really love, the hero of the story, is the church warden's wife who found it hilarious. Which, because of course, you could have got someone who found it. I mean, it's a solemn, serious service, isn't it? So you don't want to break that. So I love the fact that she found a sense of humour, and I think it would be. I'm assuming it would be okay if you had a bit of a giggle over that situation, that no one was offended. So of course you're forgiven. I think that's one of my favourites. Love it, love it. Wear a turtleneck in future.
That's what we've learned.
Yes. I think probably your instincts were quite right there, Father F, in not going fishing for the wafer. I'm not sure that would have looked very good, and would lead to an even better story that we couldn't have read out. So I am going to say definitely. I think obviously there is nothing to forgive here because everyone's fine with it. I mean, you probably have a theological discussion about what happened to the wafer, but we're not the time for it now, really.
No.
So I'm going to say definitely forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon of the Drive Time Conclave, I wish to seek forgiveness on behalf of my wife. I am a maths teacher from the Northwest, which has no bearing whatsoever on this sorry tale, except that I shall be using algebraic notation for the purpose of anonymity.
Overdue, I'd say. Overdue.
So
well done.
That's why he's referring to himself
right too.
as pi. My wife, we're going to call her Y, as in the letter Y.
Yep.
Question I've asked myself many times, and doubtless one many people will be asking by the end of this confession. She is a loving partner, a doting mother, and about as good a person as you're ever likely to meet. But she does have an Achilles heel. Shopping. Or, more precisely, Father Simon, clothes and non-essential household item shopping, which is very specific. When out shopping for any of the aforementioned, she enters a kind of shamanic trance where communication becomes virtually impossible. Extra marks. Using the word shamanic, a word I've never actually said out loud.
I don't think it exists.
Does that sound about right?
Just go for it.
Okay. By way of illustration, a good number of years ago now, when our kids, let's call them A and B, were toddlers, she spent 4 hours in a local branch of a well-known high street clothing store, an episode that almost ended in a program of marriage guidance. She got to the till with all of her choices and proceeded then to separate them into 2 piles, items to be purchased and items that actually, now she thought about it, she'd decided against, in front of a bemused sales assistant at the till. This is back to your till behaviour from yesterday.
Disgraceful.
I mention this because deciding against purchases at a later date is all part of this extraordinary, elaborate process. See, Father Simon, once out of the enchanted atmosphere of the retail outlet, many of the purchased items inexplicably lose their lustre and are no longer desirable for a plethora of reasons. This is not a problem, though, as the one thing child Y seems to enjoy... No, sorry, it's wife Y, isn't it?
Yes.
The wife is Y, the children are A and B, and he's pi.
Already tripped ourselves up on this.
It really helps,
Brilliant.
doesn't it? Right. This is not a problem, as the one thing Y, my wife, seems to enjoy almost as much as buying the things in the first place is the satisfaction of returning them and getting her money back. I honestly believe that this is an as yet undiagnosed medical condition. Anyway, I have to say that Y is exceptional at getting a refund, and I have watched in awe over the years as she's dealt with polite tenacity with the most intimidating of sales assistants. I have never seen her fail. The incident that we seek forgiveness for is one that only happened a few weeks ago. Y had bought a mattress cover from a budget outlet, and after briefly taking it out of the packet, decided it was, for some reason, unsatisfactory. She folded it neatly back into the packaging, and it looked pretty much as she'd just bought it. But even Y, with her years of expertise in this area, conceded this was going to be a tricky one. Mattress covers fall into a similar category to underwear when it comes to returning, and that means it's a no-go. You can't do it. So we got to the budget outlet, and Y duly informed the sales assistant that she wished to return the mattress cover. The sales assistant immediately called for the manager, indicating to us that this wasn't going to be plain sailing. In fact, it was going to be unlikely. A confident-looking young man appeared and, after examining the packet, asked Y if it had been opened, to which she replied that it had. His brow became furrowed, and Y, sensing that this answer, although true, was going to be problematic regarding getting a refund, quickly added a sentence that she still can't quite explain. She took a breath, and it just came out. "It's not been used," she said, "and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it's for my mother-in-law, you see, and I noticed on the packaging on my way out that it says it's not, and she lowered her voice to a whisper, "it's not waterproof." Oh, no. Boom! If it had been a boxing match, the referee would have jumped in and been leading the once confident young manager back to his corner.
Yeah.
Right, of course, madam, no problem, he says. Flushing slightly, you might say. Taking the offending item from Y and beating a hasty retreat whilst the sales assistant sorted out the refund. I stood there aghast, barely comprehending what I'd just witnessed. So Y's record remained unblemished, just like the mattress cover. But we both recognised that it was a very bad thing that she'd done and that she needed to repent. Father Simon and the Drive Time Collective. Y seeks forgiveness from two parties. The confident young manager, who was not quite so cocksure of himself by the time Y had finished with him, and my mother, X,
we're still going with that, are we?
who Y actually gets on with quite well on the whole, if I'm being honest, and who's completely oblivious to this. But I should add, for avoidance of doubt, she is still in full control of all her
Even though
faculties.
we've changed her name to an algebraic function, just
That's
to
right.
point out.
She's still got all her bodily functions together. Everything is perfectly fine, even though interesting bit of ad-libbing from Y to a shop manager who doesn't get a letter or a number for some reason. Anyway, let's see what Sister Bobby makes of this.
Okay, well, disregarding all your kind of family setup and maybe the differences between Pi and Y as to what they consider essential and how many clothes she needs, because I think there are many different households where that's not necessarily kind of in agreement. You see what I mean? So the unnecessary buying is basically a matter of opinion. And as long as it's not causing financial distress, then really Pi and Y have a difference of opinion. That's it. So that's said, that's
true.
gone.
However,
so all I'm saying is she bought something that she thought, it is not as good as I thought it was. She didn't use it. Right, but it's really difficult. She didn't lie. She didn't use it, did she? It's not like she used it for a week and went, no, I'll take this back.
she implied her mother-in-law was incontinent.
Yeah, but the mother-in-law didn't know.
And actually, she's right here.
You see, the thing is, it hasn't done any damage. The mother-in-law, it's not like she's the manager in the shop or anything like that. So I'm saying this is quite easy to forgive.
Oh, okay.
I think on this case, it's quite easy to forgive because the lie was kind of basically to tell the truth. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it does, because the truth is out there. Anyway, so you're forgiven. Your wife's forgiven.
It is very much out there, isn't it, everyone?
Brother Matthew.
We've all learned something. I'm definitely going to forgive, and the reason why is that
when you say the reason why, do
the
you
reason
mean
why
Yes.
is because Y has a skill that I wish I had. I can't take things back for refunds because I can't get into the whole. Did you open it? Well, of course I opened it because then only by opening it could I realise that I didn't want it. So I'd like my money. I don't want to get into that. I just take a hit. Oh, fine. And that is why the economy is still doing so. It's because of me buying stuff
you're feeble.
and then putting them in the bin because, I can't take them back to the store because I don't want to have that conversation. So good for Y, that's what I say.
And so therefore,
Forgiven.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
still to come, find out what prompted Matt to go off on one here.
No, once you put the stuff on the conveyor belt, you've entered into a contract with the people behind you in the queue who have the number of times
we're moving into a
someone's
soapbox
gone
territory
off
here. Thank you
when
very
I
much.
want my-
Imagine shopping with Matt on a regular basis.
No, don't.
Parish notice board time, including the always popular non-compliant
Here we
confession
go.
section.
The good bit.
It's a snappy title. So what follows now is a gentle reminder of the kind of stories we don't want any more of. Plus, we don't want you to send them in just to get mentioned at this point in the confession.
Definitely do.
The confession from Trevor that involved colliding with a deer, then knocking an old lady off her bike.
At what point did he think this was getting on?
And
That's not
then,
funny.
so that's 2 out of 2.
Yeah.
And then intentionally leaving a toilet accident on the seat of his wife's car.
What?
I mean, how do those, first of all, how do those things get connected? But each one of those things is a disqualification.
Yes.
3 strikes and you're out.
Definitely not.
Was the deer okay?
I'm sure it was fine.
Yes, just
Yes,
getting a
just
thumbs
choose.
up.
Definitely
Thank you.
fine.
That's the
Yes.
important bit.
The deer's okay. What about the old lady?
We
You know,
don't-
Bobby
okay.
didn't
No,
ask,
no,
but
no.
the old lady's fine. What about the
the
car
seat?
seat?
Can wash the car seat.
Simon from Reading. Listen, Simon from Reading. Setting fire to bins is an appalling thing to do,
Yes.
and one you won't find forgiveness from in this parish. So why did you bother?
Yeah.
Also not forgiven is Terry, who caused a security alert at Balmoral Castle in the 70s
Really?
by driving his fruit and veg lorry right up to the front door.
Well, why not?
Well, he took a wrong turning. But, different times. Now he wouldn't get anywhere close,
The
would he?
thing is,
Sorry, I'm lost. Can you help me?
I can just imagine that the powers that be, if
Imagine.
anyone's at home, I imagine she'd be glad to go and buy, half a pound of bananas.
Probably surprised to see
Yes.
a guest visitor. The tale from Graham about his boating holiday, the wrong dose of laxatives,
Oh, there you go. That's
and
why it's
using
out.
the toilet on the wrong boat. We fully understand the owner's disgust, and we can add our disgust to
Goodness
that,
me.
please, please, please. It's got laxative in it. It's not getting on.
No.
It's one of the rules. And Neil, finally, your tale of the Englishman's communication problems with his French date are sadly not suitable for tea time listening. All I'll say
Yeah.
is that when you're trying to show a girl the problem you're having flushing the toilet, pointing at the loo while saying voila probably isn't appropriate.
Why would you be trying to impress a girl?
Look at that.
Look at the toilet, though.
And it can't.
Marie Claire. There it is.
Anyway, none of these are okay. So if you can do better than
Voila.
that, your clean confessions, broadcaster please, confessions at bbc.co.uk. So from our post bag, our podcast post bag, which is a proper post bag, by the
It
way.
is,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
The usual mix of praise, indifference, and a shed load of classic confession requests. Amy via email. I don't remember the whole story of the confession I'm requesting, but it involved a man travelling with stapled trousers.
Oh, do you know what? That is a very good one.
I wish I could remember more details, but I do
Yeah.
remember I laughed out loud on my train home and then made my partner listen and then laughed all over
He
again.
had to give a presentation. Well, I won't say any more.
Wasn't it?
We-
They damaged trousers. He'd torn his
He's
trousers,
torn
so
his
he
trousers
stapled them
and
together.
He stapled them in the travel lodge or whatever it was he was staying.
You don't want to be stapled in the travel lodge, do you? That's not a good thing. Emma from Paul in Dorset. Thank you so much for all the wonderful stories you tell. I rushed back to the car after work in a determined effort not to miss the start. I've converted at least 6 friends and family to Radio 2 Confessions for drive time. So many thanks for all your hard work. The school run in the rain now beckons, but it won't be too bad because I'll be catching up on the confessions I missed last week. Isn't that nice?
Yes, it
Thank
is.
you, Emma.
Lovely. Lovely.
Al from Berry via email. Hello, Simon and everybody. With the advent of the confession from the crypt, I now wash up after the show. As having listened to the latest podcast via the iPlayer, I'm catching up on previous podcasts by working backwards, if you see what I mean. Anyway, I'm in early September at the moment.
Wow.
So plenty to go, and please do the confession involving the RAF guys who built a snowman around a bollard and wrote off a new Land Rover.
That must be one of the. Yes, that must be one of the old ones. We wouldn't have got that one through these days, would we?
I do remember doing it. It's quite a good wheeze, but obviously very
No.
dangerous and
Obviously.
absolutely not.
Don't condone that.
No, absolutely. And Jude Gardner says on Twitter, can you settle an argument, Simon? Is that the lovely Melanie C on the Confessions podcast intro? And it's not, isn't it? It's Reverend Kate, isn't it? Kate Botley. Yeah, it's her from Pause for Thought.
Is that the one from Gogglebox?
Yes.
Yeah, with
It's
the dog. The dog that always lies on his back
So
with
we
his
have
legs in the air.
so it's a priestly introduction. That's what
Yeah.
it is. If you want to get in touch, or you've got a classic confession request that we're likely to get on, don't request the hamster, don't request the goat.
No.
It's all changed.
Can't do that now.
Confessions at bbc.co.uk. Right, back to this week's lot, and time to revisit Floyd's misdemeanour, Needles and Sins.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Simon, my confession goes back many, many moons ago. I was 7 or 8 at the time, and my schooling wasn't going very well. I didn't really fit in school. I wasn't exactly a loner, but I didn't have a big group of friends either. I was bright enough, but a little disengaged from education, and needless to say, the strict regime wasn't good for my morale. I was regularly up in front of the holier-than-thou headmaster. I can still remember his pilchard breath hitting me in the face when he shouted from 6 inches away. Why anyone would have pilchards on their breath at 9 a.m, I'll never know. Nigel, is there a breakfast with pilchards?
Well, people do have fish for brekkie, so yeah, a bit weird though. Yeah,
thanks, just dropping you in there. Usually, I was sent to the headmaster's office for talking in class, being generally mischievous, and leading others astray. I might add, particularly for Sister Bobby to note, I always got my work done first. I just finished early and found it hard to sit in silence.
I agree.
Okay.
I'm with you there.
Every morning, shush, quiet in the class. Every morning, school would start with an assembly. It was awful. And at the beginning, we all had to sing a hymn, usually Morning Has Broken or something similar. We dutifully sung along whilst the headmaster watched us and pointed out anyone who wasn't putting in 100% with a, "You boy, come and sing at the front," kind of attitude. My heart sinks just thinking and writing about those times. Many people will remember similar assemblies and similar head teachers. I mean, different times. This doesn't really happen anymore, I don't think, does it? No. The music was played, this is very important, on an old record player in the hall, and it's one of those old wooden affairs about 6 feet long with a lid. So that's like a radiogram, I think we call it, yeah. You could tee up the records, close the lid, and just press the play button, which is on the front panel. There was a dinner lady and matron person whose job it was to start the record player when the headmaster pointed. Picture a severe Hattie Jakes type woman without the humour, and you have her. This is again an old. Okay. This is Ask Your Parents.
Times,
yeah. Carry on. Thanks. Anyway, the incident I want to confess to took place around the time a legendary British rock group released a seminal album. My sister had a copy, which I had heard over and over and over again coming from her room. One night, as it was seeping through my wall for the millionth time, I devised a plan. The next morning, after she'd left for school, I snuck into my sister's room like a ninja, even though I hadn't heard of ninjas back in them days. And I walked over to her record collection. I needed to borrow one of her albums for my master plan. It was a double album, I think. And I seem to remember just taking the record with the part I needed. For a moment I paused and wondered if I should have asked permission, but I was very young, and my mind was clouded with mischief, and I guess revenge, and I headed off to school. Before assembly, I asked to be excused to go to the toilet, that old ruse, claiming I wouldn't be able to sit through the assembly otherwise. I walked down the corridor, stealth-like, still ninja-like, avoiding bumping into anyone who could ruin my plans. I snuck into the school hall, past the coat racks, where I had the record stashed, and over to the aforementioned record player, the radiogram. I exchanged my record for the planned morning hymn and placed my disc on the turntable. I hovered the arm between tracks 4 and 5, queued it up ready to play. When the button on the outside was pressed, was ready to go, I returned to the class.
Clever.
Everything is wired and triggered. Once a month, we had a special assembly led by the local vicar.
Oh, here it comes, everyone.
It's nice to have a vicar in every single confession. It was even worse than a usual assembly because it included a sermon. Just what a growing boy needs. As we entered the hall, the headmaster introduced the beaming vicar. He then signalled all the pupils to rise for the morning hymn, whilst encouraging every single person to sing at the tops of their voices, or else he'd want to know why. He then waved to his assistant to start the record player. It wasn't long before they realised that the volume had been turned up slightly louder than normal, and the speakers were shuddering, and everyone present realised that this was not the usual morning hymn. Because instead of Morning Has Broken, they got this.
Go on.
Ready?
Yeah. Oh, superb.
Of course it was. Of course it was. It was Brick in the Wall, Pink Floyd.
Brilliant.
Anyway, it was pandemonium. The laughter from all the students, and some of them were joining in because they'd been told to join in by the head teacher. Some of the braver teachers were joining in as well. Anyway, the frantic signals and shouting to cut the music, cut this rubbish. the headmaster stormed over to the record player and ripping the album from the turntable while shouting, "Whose is this? Who did this?" Red-faced, fit to burst, just like the teacher on the track, this was a teacher about to explode. He then, unforgivably, snapped my sister's record with his hands, with his bare hands. It was at this point I realised my mistake. I hadn't really thought through my retrieval plan. It hadn't occurred to me how I would get the record back to the safety of my sister's bedroom. I look back on this incident with some glee. To be honest, Father Simon, it was great fun to see the look on everyone's face, and I enjoyed listening to the other kids gossiping about it for the next few weeks. I should finally come clean to my sister, who currently resides about 2,000 miles from where I live, so I'm probably okay. I'm sorry, it was me who lost, borrowed, stole, sought the destruction of your much-loved album. I know I denied it at the time, but had I owned up, Mum or Dad would almost certainly shot me to the school. So, Jane, if you're listening, I'm sorry I didn't get your record back or replace it. For what it's worth, it went to a worthy cause, to fighting the man. For the rest, I'm not sorry at all. It was a brave rebellion and something I am still enormously proud of, says Floyd, still clearly staying anonymous after all these years. Anyway, school assembly confessions, who'd have thought? Sister Bobby. What?
Well, first of all, you stole your sister's record. Secondly, you disrupted assembly. However, you did disrupt assembly with Pink Floyd, which is a good thing, and people need to know good music, and there's all sorts of good music. However, you didn't replace your sister's record. So, just on that count, because you didn't replace your sister's record, I loved you, Ruse. I loved the gag. I loved it. But you're not forgiven for not replacing your sister's record.
What do you think, Nigel?
Ooh, I thought it might have been Smoke on the Water, something like that. Because the Purple are in town soon, eh? What, Matt?
There you go.
Definitely worth the snapping. But any parents who would have shopped him to the school?
I know, that's a shocking line, isn't it?
That was, my blood ran cold. I would disown my parents if they'd done that. And I have done 3 previously, and for many occasions as well. But no, I mean, okay, he got the wrath or denied it, but definitely forgiven Floyd. I mean, and mentioned radiograms as well, and what a horrid pilchard breath headmaster he needs
and
to
actually, and speaking of the headmaster, there's a reference in there from Floyd about a shouty teacher, and of course, if you know your Pink Floyd and you know the wall, this is the reference. So let me turn this up a bit. Yeah. Right, so this is from Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Listen to this. You can't have any pudding if you don't eat your meat. And that we checked. That's Roger Waters. Apparently, he does. He said I do a very good angry Scottish judge and head teacher. Oh, so that's who that is.
What Floyd does for a living. I'd just be really intrigued what he ended up doing. Anyway,
Brother Matthew, anyway, what are you saying?
Yeah, no, I'm obviously going to forgive here. I mean, you know, it would have been nice if you'd replaced the record. And also, what did you think was going to happen to that record as soon as they worked out that it was Pink Floyd and not Morning Is Broken? It was always going to get flung off the turntable and probably end up in bits. But what a superb ruse. And obviously you're not going to own up because you are, you know, King Ninja there. So I am definitely going to forgive.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the Cookery Confessional. This is for my 14-year-old son, Max, who will actually be listening to this on the school bus on the way home. It's actually his 14th birthday today, and I feel it's time to come clean about something I've been hiding for nearly half of Max's life. Now, at this time, I imagine Max is thinking, what on earth is going on? So we're on in the coach. So hello, Max, happy birthday.
Yes.
Hope everyone's got you a card and all that kind of stuff. And now everyone is listening. What on earth is Max's mum going to... It could be all manner of things.
Okay.
For the past 14 years, the making and presentation of our 2 boys' birthday cakes has been a bit of a thing. Phew, says Maxwell. It's about
We're on
cakes.
cakes.
Yes.
All right, it's fine.
As we run our own design agency and being marginally on the competitive side, designing and making an amazing themed cake in true showstopper style to impress my sons and their friends has always been part and parcel of the parenting deal. Now, when the boys were little, it was easy to put them to bed, drag out the cake I'd baked the day before, decorate it in the evening while the little ones were safely tucked up. The cake presentation, being a thing, needed to be a secret, and obviously it needed to be increasingly impressive. However, as the boys got older, trying to hide and make the cake in the evenings when they are less inclined to be in bed by 7 p.m. has made things a little bit more tricky. So I'm sure you can only imagine my feeling of impending doom when the night before Max's 8th birthday, I was standing in my supermarket of choice at 7 p.m, staring pathetically at the cake ingredients with no cake theme in mind and definitely no cake sitting waiting at home to be decorated. My excuse was that I completed a full week's work, including 2 new client presentations, and now it was looking like a long, long night ahead. Having filled my basket with the ingredients to make and decorate some sort of cake, I walked miserably down the aisle to the checkout, where now to the corner of my eye, in the fresh cake counter, I noticed a row of 3 glorious, fresh chocolate cakes. A triple chocolate fudge cake, a slightly smaller chocolate cake, and a third, even smaller, very, very extremely chocolatey cake.
Oh.
Is it a Starby Day?
It is,
Excellent.
yes.
I literally stopped and stared at the cakes for about 10 minutes, weighing up in my mind whether my conscience would allow me to take, just on this one occasion, a shortcut. I picked up all 3 cakes and put them in my basket. Then I took them out and put them back in the fridge. I couldn't do it. I had actually to make this cake. That's what I do. I walked off. But as I waited for my cake-making ingredients to move down the belt, I actually capitulated. "Hold on!" I yelled to the checkout girl. "I need something else." Sprinted across the supermarket, grabbed all 3 cakes and some extra chocolate icing for good measure, threw them onto the conveyor belt along with the ingredients. I would make the final decision when I got home. By 9 o'clock, the boys were tucked up and in bed, and my baking marathon could begin. My husband, who, it has to be said, had come to dread the night before the boys' birthdays, was fully encouraging and said things like, "It's too late for a homemade cake. We don't have a theme. He's 8, he'll never know." He said all this while lazing on the sofa with a large glass of Shiraz.
Well, we're all there.
"I can't cheat," I said, but as it turns out, I could. To my shame, I piled all 3 chocolate cakes on top of one another to make a tiered chocolate mountain about a foot high, slathered them with extra shop-bought chocolate icing, and plopped down on the sofa next to my husband, large glass of wine in hand, feeling relieved if a little guilty. And she's actually provided a photograph
Goodness me.
of the cake, which I'm just showing as evidence to
Yes.
Matt and Bobby. That is some chocolate
There's
feast.
quite a lot of chocolate there.
There
Yes.
is. It's rather magnificent. Okay. Birthday morning dawns. Much excitement, present opening and off to school. Max returned with a number of his friends, and after the usual frenzy of activity, the time came. I took a big breath, lit the candles, carried the chocolate tower cake out to make the big reveal. A look of total amazement came over the faces of the gathered party. What an incredible, huge chocolate edifice. What an amazing mother. What more could any 8-year-old boy want? The boys duly dived in and all was good with the world. That night, as I tucked my tired but happy 8-year-old into bed, he leaned over, kissed me and said, "Thank you, Mummy. That was the best cake ever. You're so clever."
He really said that, did he?
Now was not really... well, maybe it was. I should confess my sin. I don't want to... Just to my adoring son, I could just tell him. Did I? No, of course I didn't. Instead, I took the glory. I kissed my son and said, "That's my pleasure, darling. I'm so glad you loved it. Took ages." Deed done, you might think. Crisis averted, cake enjoyed and appreciated, all good. However, the reason for my confession is this. Keen to never again have to feel so bad, I have continued year after year to make sure I've made the cake in plenty of time, always with a ridiculously challenging theme and a long evening of icing, modelling and a grumpy husband with a bottle of Shiraz. And literally, every single year, my son says something along the lines of, "That cake was really great, Mum. But do you remember the chocolate tower one you made? That was really, really amazing." He even mentions it when talking about his birthday at other times throughout the year. So every year I've been given the ultimate chance to confess, and every year I've smiled sweetly and just nodded. "Yeah, I remember. Whew, that was great." So now I'd like to confess to Max. There he is on the coach. And I said, I'm sorry, and I'm glad you loved it, but I didn't make it. And yes, I did take all the glory. So, Father Simon, I request forgiveness not just from Max for not coming clean, but also from two groups of listeners. One, the baking congregation, who should know that making impressively decorated cakes really does take forever. And from the overachieving parents all over the country who found themselves up all night baking birthday cakes, sewing a handmade Little Red Riding Hood costume for World Book Day, or finishing the electrics on their son and daughter's 3D volcano project that's due in tomorrow. We've all done that.
Yeah.
Finally, of course, I should say, can you tell Max there is a cake waiting for him at home? And guess what it is? I bet it's another one of those.
Really?
Yeah.
I bet she's done another chocolate tower.
It's a homemade
dried
one.
fruit one, I think.
No.
Yeah. Everyone's favourite.
Anyway, happy birthday. Anyway, happy birthday, Max. I think you're going to have a monster of a cake when you get home. But this admiration for your mother as far as the cakes are concerned, your favourite ever cake, bit of a deception here, a few lies being told. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Well, parents of children will be breathing, I think, a big sigh of relief at this story. Because the thing is, it's such a great, actually, revelation. You're doing this now when he's 14. It's actually, Louise, the right time. Because obviously there's great value in making your own cakes in your family. That's the value. It's not about having... I mean, he has a cake. Enough said, he has a cake. That's great. You usually make them. That's great. But this time, when you're working full-time as well and running a business... Give yourself a break. I understand about the deception, though, because obviously you didn't want your son to feel less important because you didn't have time to make it because you're too busy working and doing other things. That's the thing. That's the conflict with parents.
And so,
sometimes they can't do it all. I think you're absolutely forgiven, but also teaching your son as well that can't always do it all. It's a good time to do this at 14.
All right, okay. Well,
You're forgiven.
Matthew.
Well, I frankly think she's made a bit of a rod for her own back. I personally subscribe to the school of parenting without the faff. So why are you bothering with this designing and making a cake? Get a big cake from the shop is absolutely fine. Even bothering with the icing, no thank you.
And claim it's
I'm
yours.
on the sofa with the Shiraz. However, I think listeners with an ear for detail will have spotted the far more serious misdemeanour buried within this confession, and that is the running off once you put your stuff on the conveyor belt in the supermarket and go, oh, I'm going to get something else. No, once you put the stuff on the conveyor belt, you've entered into a contract with the people behind you in the queue who have the number of times.
We're moving into a soapbox territory here. Thank you very much.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That was Louise's tale, Fake by the Ocean, which concludes this week's batch of confessions. Let me know what you thought and if you forgave any of them. And if you have your own confession, and let's face it, you've got a bag full, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Before we go then, time for the latest confession from the crypt, a classic. And it's probably one of the most shocking confessions ever, not for being explicit or vulgar or inappropriate. This is just quite extraordinary. Phil Morgan in Fareham, Kathy Melia, who listens to the podcast whilst ironing, Sarah Jones, possibly Sarah Jones, Joe Hardingham, Sharon Berrington, Andy Hayhurst, Sarah Harding, probably not that one, and finally to Lee in Buckinghamshire, who sent in this email. Can I please, as in, it was Lee who sent in this email,
Yes.
but on behalf of everybody, Can I please request a confession that you had about 5 years ago? The confession was so shocking, I yelled, no, so loudly my dog actually flew like something possessed out of his bed, fearing he'd done something horrendous while fast asleep. Well, we've all done that. He's still, well, no, not really, not.
Well, we have.
He's still of a nervous disposition even now. Back to this confession. It was about a guy who wanted to move, I think, to Devon, but his wife didn't want to go. What came next was so unbelievable, I still think about it to this day. Please air this again, as it's never quite as interesting when I try to recount the story. So here it is, all the way through our classic confession from the crypt in the country.
The Confessions podcast.
Simon and the Collective, I approach you seeking forgiveness for a web of deception I wove some 10 years ago now. I've always had a liking for the Dorset countryside. This was born of several family holidays taken there during my childhood. In 2001, my wife and I were living in a Hertfordshire town with our two children, 5 and 7. My wife grew up there, and her side of the family are from all around Hertfordshire. I'd previously raised the point that if the opportunity arose, we should escape from the home counties for more rural climes, but she was having none of it. Owing to the fact that she'd always lived there, that was where she called home, and that was where she was staying. Besides which, our two children were nicely settled at school. I was naturally disappointed at this response, but kept my feelings to myself, while pondering over whether there was going to be any way to make a move and still keep the family together. However, time went on, and the idea of moving was forgotten about. We were happy. I make my living, Simon, as a freelance software engineer, and in 2002 started a new contract in a large Berkshire town. It was then that I began to weave my dastardly web of deceit, for which I now seek your forgiveness. Whilst working in Berkshire, I met James. James told me that he was soon to be starting up a new company on the Dorset coast, and that he would be looking for an experienced software engineer, and would I be interested? Well, I told him that I was very excited by the idea, but that my wife had no wish to move from our home in Hertfordshire. However, I would see if there was any possibility of talking her round. Well, that weekend I mentioned it to my wife, emphasising that this was the career opportunity of a lifetime, and that I would never be able to forgive myself if I turned it down. I even told her that if she still refused to move, our marriage would become a weekends and holidays arrangement. Suffice to say that after much emotional debate, she reluctantly agreed to the idea of a move. Our house was duly put on the market and the search began in earnest for a property in Dorset. Eventually we settled on a house and arrangements were made for the children to start at a new school. I left my contract in Berkshire and began working for the new company in Dorset. I had only been there for a week, however, when James, now my new boss, gave me the devastating news that the new venture was no longer viable as our first and only customer had pulled out, so the new company would not be able to carry on trading as planned. That evening, I broke the news as gently as I could to my wife. She was obviously devastated, and we spent quite a few evenings discussing what the future might hold, all the time trying to keep it from the kids. What I didn't tell her, or the children, however, is that I had made the whole thing up.
What? Derek!
James didn't exist, and I was never offered a job in Dorset. The week that I claimed to be working for James, I spent sitting in cafes, reading papers and going for walks on Dorset's beautiful Jurassic coastline. The whole thing was a ruse to persuade my wife to agree to move the family. The episode proved to be of little financial hardship, as I simply went back to contracting as I had been doing previously, but at least we now had a lovely new home in the heart of the Dorset countryside. I knew it would be a jaw-dropper.
Unbelievable.
10 years on, says Derek, we're still married, still living in Dorset, and I'm still contracting. Our oldest is now 17 and doing A-levels, while our youngest is doing GCSEs. Neither my wife nor children are any of the wiser.
What?
To this day. I did what I did in order to live in the place I love with the ones that I love, but after all these years, I can hold it in no longer. So I now beg forgiveness.
In the doghouse.
We were still doing the TV programme, that we would so have the family ready to do this. Aha. So I now beg forgiveness from my wife for the upheaval and the little white lies from my two children, even though they seem to have been happy enough living in Dorset, and of course the collective. Yours, with humble penitence and humility. And as soon as I got to the bit where he said, what I didn't tell her is that I'd made the whole thing up, I thought, yep, absolutely. My guess is, Derek, no chance of forgiveness. Not just from the guys here, which I think is the least of your troubles. But let's see what we get here from Sister Stephanie.
That is absolutely shocking, that. I mean, it sounds like things have worked out in the end, but that's just terrible to do such a lie like that.
As
and
lies
to go
go,
and hang out
it's
in
up
a
there, isn't
cafe.
it?
Yeah. I just think that's outrageous, personally. And if that was my husband, I'd be showing him the door.
This could be a Jeremy Kyle, couldn't it? It would be.
Yeah.
He told me that he was meeting James, but he was lying. Mother Superior.
Oh, Derek. You know, I don't know what to say to this one, really, because actually they're all happy now, I guess. They're living in a lovely part of the world. I mean, who wouldn't want to move to Dorset? But actually to kind of fundamentally undermine your marriage and your family life in that way is pretty awful. So I'm kind of torn, because I think you've ended up where you probably should have always been, but the deception you used to get to that point, I think, is unforgivable. Yeah. So I don't think I can forgive you, although I'm teetering. I can't forgive you. Sorry, I can't forgive you.
I mean, if you forgive this lie, you're going to be forgiving almost anything else.
Absolutely, it undermines everything. Yeah, so you can't. I can't forgive you.
Here we go then with Brother Matthew.
I think this is amazing. This is true, jaw-dropping. I could not believe that he'd do that. However, it was a gamble, and it paid off. I mean, he's still together. You know, if the marriage had failed and
until
all
tonight.
that, then yeah, well, exactly.
She doesn't know he
doesn't.
lies.
It's amazing.
So it might be in the balance.
I tell you what, the flack he's going to get tonight. I'm going to forgive him just because he's going to get an enormous amount of flack from his wife and his kids. So the one silver lining is that I forgive him, which is no silver lining at all.
Yeah,
that is
absolutely.
superb.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
Well, I told you it was truly extraordinary. Bobby's jaw is still
Oh, I wish I had
on the floor.
a sound effect for my face. We need a sound effect for this jaw-dropping, utter shock, despicable act.
And how good to hear Steph McGovern.
Steph McGovern
Whatever
and
happened
Sally
to her?
Traffic.
Steph
She-
McGovern. I don't know
nothing.
where she'd have disappeared off the face of this earth.
Obscurity, that's where she went. Anyway, it isn't one of those. You wonder what's happening now in that family. I mean, it is sort of grounds for walking out, isn't it?
I don't know how he could manage to confess, because there's a real risk that she might go, I'm sorry, but we are now leaving.
Going back to where I always wanted to be. So long.
Bye.
Anyway, if you'd like to choose one and choose a confession from the crypt, let us know. And if you have a confession, send it all on the email, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Sister Bobby, you forgave 3 people this week. That's 3 out of 4. What a softie you
Who,
are.
me?
Yes.
That's quite a lot.
But intriguingly, Matt forgave 3 this week and didn't give any verdict on Monday. You just went into a rant about supermarket checkouts.
Well, I think I was speaking for the nation,
Which
though,
takes you
wasn't
to
I, really?
101.5 forgives for this year and 51.5 not forgives.
Oh, because of the half, because I've not forgiven anyone.
Because who knows?
Because who knows
That's what
why.
we actually thought. If you made it to the end of the last podcast, I asked you to tweet, and then I had a Turkish cigarette. Ruth, Kazi, Nick, Matty, Gavin, and loads more did exactly that. This week's code phrase is...
Stapled in the travel lodge?
No, because that wasn't in the actual programme. I'm going to say... Successfully negotiated my first tongue,
Oh, lovely. Yes.
which is a priestly thing, so it's all right.
Yes.
That's successfully negotiated my first tongue. Don't forget, you can hear our whole radio show every Friday from 5 on BBC Radio 2. Thank you for downloading us.
The Confessions podcast. Go in peace.